Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this live broadcast where we're going to be taking questions on the tax and social security recommendations coming to the States later this month. We have roughly an hour, and we're going to answer as many questions as we can from as many people as possible. And because of that, we may not be able to take second questions from anybody because we do want to get as many people a chance to ask one question. Just to make clear, you can submit your questions either in the comments sections below or by emailing taxreview@gov.gg. We're also going to be avoiding asking or answering very similar questions if we possibly can to try and get a broad range of subjects. My role this evening is really as the anchor or chairman, and I'm going to be farming out the questions to the other members here with me, although I will help to answer them where I can, particularly on social security. I'm joined this evening by the President of Policy and Resources, Deputy Peter Fairbrush, its Vice President, Deputy Mark Hellier, one of its members, Deputy Dave Mahoney, and by the State's Treasurer, Beth Ann Haynes. Now, before we go to the first question, we thought it might be helpful to quickly recap on what the recommendations actually are and why we believe they're needed. So I'm going to hand over now to the P&R President, Deputy Fairbrush, to give you that quick summary.
Thanks very much, Peter. And of course, the headline, and it's understandable that people have said so and concerned themselves with, is GST. But what's being proposed is a package, but it's an interlocking package. If you take out one part of it, the whole thing is compromised. So, but what the states have already decided is that there is a shortfall. And indeed, slide 1 shows there's the shortfall. We've estimated the shortfall, and it is an eye-watering figure, at £100 million every year by the year 2040. But we don't intend to raise all of that just by raising taxes. Our plan is to try and restrain public spending and also increase the working population. And the states, again, have already made a decision in respect of that just as recently as last September. So we've got higher inward migration, and we expect to be able to make, and we're going to have to make, significant savings at about £10 million through reforms in the public service. And also the policy letter makes it very clear that we're going to have significant restraints on committee budgets in the next 2 years. And also the government work plan, well intended as it was, is too ambitious, and we're going to be making, or intending to make, severe restrictions in relation to the aspirations in that plan. Now, a great deal's been said on corporate tax, and we really have addressed that. We've gone out and we've looked at it, and we've received advice from the highest quality that the best that we can raise is about £20 million more. Now, that's incredibly important. We have to engage with industry and other Crown dependencies. We've just seen an example today, whereas if we're seen to be not competitive, we could lose jobs to other Crown dependencies. So we've got to be as effective as we can, and we've got to develop our most successful sector as much as we can. Now, in relation to slide 2, what we're proposing to do, and this is almost unique really, we're proposing to reduce income tax to 15% for income up to £30,000. That means anybody earning £30,000 or more would see a reduction in their tax bill of about £900. We're also going to increase personal tax allowance by £600, meaning the threshold before you pay any income tax increases reduce tax bills by a further £120. Keep in mind that for high earners, and that's somebody starting with a £90,000 income, their personal tax allowance is gradually withdrawn, and indeed withdrawn pretty quickly. The introduction of allowances on social security contributions, where currently many people pay them on all of their income, will be made, and this will make the system much fairer and for many reduce their burden even more. For an employed person making £30,000, it would see them about £700 per annum better off. So we're looking at those kind of figures. And finally, a broad-based 5% goods and services tax will raise certain revenue. So in relation to slide 3, we see that GST is one part of the package. And of course, on its own, GST is regressive or can be regressive. But with the measures that we intend to put in, if approved by the states, that creates a more progressive tax system where most lower and middle income households are better off compared to where they are now. And those people that can afford to pay more will pay more. And also, it reduces the reliance we already have on taxing income. And that means we don't have to raise all our additional income for, in the main, working islanders, which is the way we've done it presently. So this spreads it more broadly. And most of all, it achieves the aim of ensuring that we can continue to fund essential services that people rely upon. Not the nice to haves, not the, oh, we'd like that, and can we have this, that and the other, but these are core public services such as health and pensions. And slide 4 shows it's the pressure in those two areas which is driving up our cost of services. And the demand is only going to continue to grow. It's not going to suddenly stop. The reason for that is our changing population. And these pyramids show that, 71, 2020 and 2050. We've more people entering the period than they're claiming pensions or requiring health services. And the simple fact means that the costs in those areas, they're already very big, but they're going to get more and more. So this is a challenge that we're facing. It's a challenge we can't move away from. It's a challenge that we cannot avoid. And so that's not a criticism of anybody or any generation, but it's the fact that the demographics are against us and the challenges will continue. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, thank you, Peter. We're going to move to the questions now. Before going to the first question, can I say, if you think you want to ask a question, I'd really recommend you get it in the next 15, 20 minutes, because we will be taking them roughly in order, and therefore, I'd hate you to run out of time to get your question in. The first one comes from the management team at Home Island, who say, we believe a GST will be one of the final nails in the coffin for their industry. If deputies are concerned to see the hospitality industry in Guernsey survive, shouldn't they reject GST? I'm going to go to Mark Hellier on that one.
Thanks, Peter. And good evening in Herm. It's a very interesting question. Clearly, nobody wants to see any industry suffer as a result of the tax proposals, but we've reached a position now where we can't do nothing. And as both Peters have already said, this is not just about GST. This is about a package. Now, one of the most difficult things about the hospitality industry, particularly post-COVID and the problems that we've had over Brexit, is finding staff. Now, as you've heard, the proposals will mean that 60% of households in Guernsey, the lowest paid, and unfortunately that does include a significant amount of carers and people that work in hospitality, will be better off under these proposals. They will have more money in their pocket, and that means that they'll have more to spend. So I'm hoping it's a beautiful offering. That's not going to go anywhere. And I expect that with the proposals, there will be more money to spend, not less. The only alternative to the GST, unfortunately, is to look again at more income taxes, and that will be a significant hit on a smaller group of the working public. So we believe this is the right answer. We certainly don't want to see the end of any industry, but we believe this is the right approach.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there rather than us all answering the question, because I want to get through lots of questions if I possibly can. Question 2, we really are going around the bailiwick this evening. It's from Alex, one of the ordinary reps in the Guernsey States. And he asked, did the GST idea come from the previous P&R committee, and did the current P&R come up with the benefits such as the 15% income tax? What is the timeline? Peter, do you want to deal with that one?
Yeah, the timeline is, if the states approve these proposals in January, is that the GST part would come in April of 2025, in other words, a couple of months or so before the election. As to whether the GST came from the previous P&R committee, I can remember, and former Deputy Mary Lowe reminded me quite recently, that the previous president of P&R, not long before the election in October of 2020, said we've got no option but to bring in GST next time, i.e. this term. Now, the current P&R and others, I think, have had similar recollections. And, of course, he was right. That's really where we are. Nobody wants to do this, as both Mark Hellier and Peter Roffey have said, both on this occasion and previously. And the benefits of such as the 15% income tax, I'm not going to claim the credit for that, but it is a P&R stroke Peter Roffey idea. And I think it is what Mark Hellier has said to us previously, is that other jurisdictions are envious of us for thinking of that package.
Can I just add to that? Actually, the idea of a GST goes back way beyond the previous P&R. In fact, we've got legislation, the enabling legislation in place from, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. Bethan would probably know better than me. But I think maybe it was an Alistair Longlay's review that this came out as 2015. That's something we may have to do in future, so 7 years ago. So yeah, it's been around for quite a long time, and people have been trying to avoid it if they possibly could. I think we feel we've probably reached the level the situation where it's very difficult to avoid. I'm going to move on now. Carl, how did the states estimate the GST costs in their examples? what items of expenditure were included. We're going to bring up, I think, some slides on this, but Dave, you want to have a go at this one?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. In terms of the two questions there, really, the first part, how did the states estimate those GST costs? And really what we did there is actually we met with the Controller of Tax in Jersey, obviously where they've had this for some 13, 14, 15 years now, and asked them to update us. In fact, they visited Guernsey and gave us an update. So really, we just draw on their experience of the actual costs that they are now experiencing today in Jersey. So in fact, in terms of estimations, we're really not estimating very much at all. These are actual costs that our Jersey counterparts have said, this is what it costs to administer, this is the type of form that will have to be filled out, a very simple page of A4, half a side of A4. So rather than having to sort of wet finger in the wind, these are actual numbers that we have been given, and there is no reason to believe why Guernsey should be any other way. In terms of the item of expenditure that are included, I'm not sure whether that means what's going to be within scope.
What's generating the costs? I guess it means that.
Yeah.
Is it the customs? Is it the border agency? It could mean what items are included in being taxed.
I think if we take the narrower version of that to start, and then because I suspect the other one will come up later in any event, the items that were included with those costs will of course be staff costs. Now, Bethan will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was 8 to 10 staff or something. Bethan, was that correct? That would be required, split between border agency and obviously revenue staff. So again, we've not tried to guesstimate anything there. Those things are known to be the costs in Jersey, and there is no reason why they should be different in Guernsey instead.
Thank you. What stuck in my mind when we did meet Jersey is their Controller of Revenue Services basically said GST of all of their various forms of tax they have in Jersey was the most revenue efficient to actually raise. So that was a really interesting point. Mark, next. If you really care about people on lower incomes, then why aren't you making it £20,000 before income tax? It would be easier to implement the multiple tax bandings, and it would take people out of the system altogether. Back to Peter, I guess, for that one.
Yeah, I think it was a balance. It was a balance that we had to look at in relation to it, and everything has a cost. And the cost of giving back, and I hate that phrase because it's public money paid by the taxpayer anyway, but of making the adjustment in relation to income tax was already £29 million, which is a big chunk of money. So you've got to draw the line somewhere. I mean, Mark makes a good point, and it's, trial and error. I think we've got it right, and we'll be looking at that over a period of time. But everything costs money, and we can only do what we can realistically afford.
And again, if I can add, actually one of the main ways we're helping people on modest incomes is the social security changes, and they tend to be overlooked. People do tend to focus on the tax side of it because it's sort of termed a tax reform, but that will really make a big difference to people on lower incomes. Going on to Dave. Concerns that 5% would just be the beginning, and through time this will increase. Can you reassure the public how long it will be locked in for? Mark.
This is a really good question, and one that I've had to face many times from members of the public. Now, the problem that we have legally and constitutionally is that no states can bind states to come in the future. So whilst we can promise all sorts of things sat here, we don't know who will be elected in the next election, and we don't know what decisions they will make. So to some extent, we are prevented from doing that. But there is an amendment I know that's already been submitted by Deputy Prow, and that says that instead of GST, the amount, the percentage, being something which can just pass through in any ordinary budget, if P&R in the future wanted to change that rate, it would have to come back to the states with an individual policy letter for this to all be debated again. So it can't just be brought through on the nod. I fully expect, we support, P&R supports that amendment, and I fully expect it will be passed as well. So hopefully that will provide some reassurance. But ultimately, none of us really knows what's coming around the corner, and we can't really provide any cast iron guarantees. But hopefully that will provide some reassurance.
Okay. The next question is from Carl. Says, I'm not sure about the premise, but I'll read it anyway. Is GST a really good idea when the Jersey states have openly admitted that it was a complete disaster? Dave, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, I think you summed it up in the question, really. I'm not sure that the premise of the question is actually correct. I certainly haven't heard anyone in Jersey, other than a recently visited deputy that decided to say that it was an abject failure. I don't believe that view is shared amongst most Jersey politicians. And of course, I guess the proof of that is that he hasn't returned to Jersey and then laid anything to try and have this overturned. So I think the premise of the question is correct. I don't believe it's correct that it is a failure.
I think it's probably true that any community would like to tax as little as they possibly can, and therefore, I'm sure people in Jersey regretted the need to do this in the same way I doubt any member of the Guernsey States is salivating at the idea of bringing any new tax. The next question is really of a technical nature, so I'm going to put this Beth Ann's way. Sally says income up to 30,000 is going to be taxed at a lower rate in future. So what is the proposed rate for income above 30,000?
Okay, so that one's quite straightforward because there are no proposals to change the basic rate of tax, which is 20%. So it would be 20% for anything above 30,000, and obviously for anybody earning over 90,000, as it is today, the personal allowances will start to be withdrawn, so that will affect their marginal rate, so what they pay on every extra pound earned. But the basic rate of tax remains at 20%.
Okay, thank you for that. David, slightly echoes our very first question. Won't GST further damage tourism? And with young people leaving the island due to the cost of living, won't GST fuel that fire? Peter?
Well, we accept it in the first year of GST. It will be inflationary. And the estimate's about 3.4%. So pensions, etc., benefits will increase by at least that level. If that figure's wrong and it ends up being, say, 5%, the adjustment will be made the following year. So people will get the first year of it. I don't think it will damage tourism. I mean, the proof of the pudding will be the eating. But what it will enable us to do is from our tourists that visit us, that are used to paying it in Jersey or United States or France or wherever they go on holiday, they will pay about £6 million, which we don't currently collect. So I think the nature of our tourism industry has changed. And I don't think it will damage tourism.
Okay, thank you. And we're coming to our ninth question already. We're rattling through them. Pete says, how are things such as petrol going to be treated for GST? Will we pay GST on the fuel tax? So sort of, are we taxing a tax? So, Mark, we are, aren't we?
Yes, effectively we are. The Environment and Infrastructure Committee, there are lots of other smaller taxes like paid parking, and many people have raised other environmental and behavioural taxes. The problem is with them is that the more effective they are, the less money you collect. And so the replacement effectively for fuel tax is being looked at as a distance charging mechanism, which the Environment and Infrastructure Department are looking at. But yes, there will be a cost, an additional cost for fuel for vehicles as a result of GST.
Okay. Still keep your calls coming in because we've only got a few lined up. We've got plenty of time left, so we can maybe be slightly more expansive in our answers if members want to, although if we start going the other way, I'll let you know. Right. Next one's from Elizabeth. What is classed as an average income for a middle earner? Lots of people earn a significant amount and are barely getting by. How can you be sure lower middle earners will be better off? Dave, do you want to have a stab at that one?
Yeah, I guess Beth Ann may know the figures better than I, but I believe median earnings is about 37,000, Beth Ann, something
correct,
like
yes.
that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what average in that context means, because isn't average something around 44,000 or around that? So, but of course, it's very hard a number to deal with because the expenses that people have are significantly different. So 44,000 for one person, so I apologise if I got that number wrong, could be significantly more or less than depending on if you have children or whatever. So it's very hard to standardise that, and that's why when we've done these numbers here, they've been averaged out. So that we could see the sort of curves. There's one of the slides. I'm not sure. Can we bring that slide up just very quickly?
The income, the better and worse off. That's the one.
Yeah. This slide here. Yeah. So obviously, with 63,000 people on the island, it's very, very difficult. It's impossible to have that set individually for 62,000 people. So this is, in fact, was one of the main tools we used whilst looking at this in the tax group to try and make that as flat as possible. But also to have it progressive, as you can see. I assume everyone can see that slide at home. That we've got at one end of the scale people that are up to nearly 4% better off, and of course at the other end sort of 3% worse off. So it's a very hard question to answer. The second part of it, how can we be sure that low and middle earners will be better off, is contained in that slide there that everyone can see. And I think, again, sorry, it's a bit distant for me, but it's about the 60th percentile, something like that, before the chart turns red. And even then, only at 0.1, 0.2% worse off. So you can see that slide there shows that the lower and middle earners actually are better off per the chart that is on screen at the moment.
But also, you've got to get up to, looking at that chart, you've got to get up to about the 80th percentile before you're making a contribution of more than 1% more tax. And that's based on an income of about £100,000 per annum. That's what that shows. Now, that's still tough for people, don't get me wrong, it is tough for people.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in Mark, but I'll just make, for absolute clarity, so we're not deceiving anybody, this is the average in all of these percentiles. There will be a few people in the 50th percentile who may end up paying more. There may be people in the 70th percentile because of their family circumstances might pay less, but on average, this is the impact on those income groups. But Mark,
Could we bring up slide 9? Because I think this is quite interesting. We do get asked a lot, how does this apply to me? And it was incredibly difficult to create a sort of, if you like, an online calculator that people could put their circumstances into, because everybody is slightly different. You have a mortgage, no mortgage, children, no children, and so on. So you can see a sort of, this is very close to the median wage, a single adult aged 16 to 64. And you can see here in this list, and the reason I wanted to bring this up is it's probably too much to go through in detail now, but there are several examples like this across a different range of different people with different earning levels on ourfuture.gg, and there's a lot of information on there which people can access to see how this would affect them personally. You can see here this particular person working at that kind of level, which is, again, tourism has been raised several times. This would apply, I suspect, to many people employed in tourism and in care. They would be 1.5% better off, which is about £513 a year, and that's after you've paid GST on your shopping.
There are 20, just to be clear, I think there are 20 on there now, but they're not there.
none of them are going to be exactly your circumstances, but you will hopefully find one that is very close to your circumstances. If you don't, then fire in a question. I'm sure the team will try to make an approximation.
Indeed.
Okay, we're going to move on. Steve says, will there be some items, like in the UK, which be exempt from GST or zero rated, such as children's clothes or food? I'm going to get the technical answer first from Bethan, and then the rest of us will deal with the politics about why it is as it is. So.
Well, the technical answer is no, because a GST would become... But firstly, it becomes very complicated when you start exempting things and zero rating them. And I think it's popularly thought that if we exempt food, you'd be helping the lowest paid. But actually, that's not what the analysis shows us. And there's detail in the policy letter that shows that if you exempt food, well, first of all, we lose a large chunk of income. And that the benefits, the people who benefit the most from that, are the people who spend the most on food, which are those higher up the income distribution. And so the proposal from P&R is that this is a broad-based, low-rate GST that applies on everything.
I mean, the reason that we've kept it simple is that we balanced it with the 15% tax rate that we referred to, with the social security provisions that Peter's referred to, and the allowances that are going to be made, the extra allowances. That's the idea. And you go back to that slide. I don't think we need to physically go back to that slide that we looked at before. So, and the simpler it is, the easier it is to administer, the less costs there are.
Yeah, I mean, I went into this process, well, I wasn't convinced I was supporting GST at all, but I assumed that I would be wanting to see things like food exempt. When I looked at it, actually we'd lose the money that we are able to spend on focused help for those at the bottom end, and actually it would make it more regressive rather than more progressive. So that I think is one of the reasons. Anybody want to add? Or
just one other thing. One of the first questions we had was about the cost of GST and administering that. And experience has shown in other jurisdictions that as soon as you start adding exemptions here and there, it disproportionately puts up the cost of administration, not only for the states, but also for individual businesses as well. So that was another reason why the broader base, the cheaper to administer and cheaper to run for people in the community.
Okay, we're going to move on to our 12th question of the evening from Matt, who asks, do the estimated costs of GST, presumably administering a GST in this case, include any extra any civil service inflation-linked pay rises. I'm going to go to Mark on that, I think.
Well, in terms of what we need to raise and the amounts that Deputy Fairbrush was talking at the start, that includes staff pay and allowances for inflation in the future going forward to that point. And as Deputy Mahoney said earlier, the estimates that we've used they're real life estimates from Jersey. We know how many staff they have, we know what they get paid, we know where there are difficulties in administering the system and so on, which is why we've applied some money towards helping with training and other aspects of it. So yes, we've been as accurate as we possibly can in being. In fact, we've been slightly, I think, on the conservative side of costs. We're slightly higher than Jersey itself is doing, because we need to allow probably for some extra work in the first part of any implementation phase if it's passed.
And of course, the income from GST will be likely to go up with inflation as well. So, as a percentage of the tax take, it should remain the same, assuming that there isn't an automatic tax linkage for civil service pay, of course. Okay, Sophie, how do you intend to increase the working population? That's an interesting question. Who wants to take that? Go on, Peter, you take that.
I'm quite happy to do that. Yeah. The states have agreed, as recently as September, what's that, 4 months ago now, that there's going to be net migration, more people coming in over the next 30 years at 300 people per annum. So that will, well, you can do your own arithmetic in relation to that. And we've already done more than that in the last year or two. That's dependent on economic circumstances, and if Guernsey suddenly became a financial desert, then that wouldn't happen. People are only going to be attracted if they can make a reasonable living in Guernsey, if they can better their lives.
Find somewhere to live as well?
And find some, absolutely, because we've got a real shortage of that, and Peter's addressed that, social housing. We've got to do other stuff for non-social housing. You know, it's a real consideration. But in connection with all of that, we can do what we're going to do in relation to what we've said.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that? No? Fine. Then we'll move on to John. John says, how can people have more to spend when you keep upping the rubbish fees, fuel duty, registration tax, etc., and now onto GST? At least for GST, we can choose what to spend money on. I think I'll better take the first bit, because rubbish fees come on to me. Yes, they are going up, but I have to say they are, unlike the original intention, only funding a relatively modest now percentage of the costs of the whole waste strategy, and we are now leaning on general revenue to actually fund the rest of that. But it's a broader question than just rubbish fees. So Mark, do you want to?
Yes, I mean, one of the ways, I mean, I said in an interview the other day that if we'd started this journey at the first part of it, and let's be honest, putting taxes up is a bit of a poisoned chalice, particularly for a first-time politician. If I thought we'd be able to get to this stage and suggest tax amendments which allow 60% of households to have more money and less tax, whilst raising more for public services, I would have thought that was impossible. But we have managed to do it. And the way we've managed to do it is to spread the burden more widely. So we've already mentioned those visiting the island, for example. They'll be, when they spend money, they'll be paying into the coffers. There are a lot of people that come to Guernsey, for example, to work for short periods. And also there are a lot of people in Guernsey that are living off capital, and they pay no taxation whatsoever. They contribute nothing to the economy at all in terms of tax. So that by broadening the tax base, we've been able to reduce income tax and to restructure social security, which is actually it's not as often discussed as GST, but it's actually more of a fundamental amendment to that system than has ever been before. Because at the moment, if you earn up to sort of 7,800, the minute you go a penny over the threshold, you have to pay social security on every pound that you earn. Under this new system, you'll have an allowance which is very much like the allowance you get for income tax, and that will put particularly the poorer paid in a much better position than they are at the moment, which I think is a really amazing result.
Registration tax. Forget the other two just for the moment, because they've been dealt with. Registration tax, that's going up. That had been put up for 6 years. It's now going up much quicker than inflation. But there is a choice there, because one of the reasons that we're looking at, it's a tax that will bring in more money. It's also environmental tax, because people are still buying very big gas-guzzling cars. And this is a way, and you've got the choice to do that. That's absolutely fine. You pay extra tax for that for a whole variety of reasons, and it's still, even with the increase, going to be a lot cheaper than other places.
Okay. Right, we'll move on. Michelle, can we assume that costs to run the island are being managed down at the same time as revenue is being increased? are the current estates as efficient as they're able to be? I think it's always hostage for fortune to say there are no other efficiencies that can be found, but the basic thrust is, are you just raising money or are you really trying to cut costs as well? So, Dave, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think we're trying to do both, and of course there are propositions in the policy letter that speak to this. Read that we appreciate that it's a double-edged sword. We need to raise money, but we also need to find some savings somewhere. We are doing that. We're looking at staff costs, the rate of pay, and whether we use outside consultants and all of those things. So those things are all being looked at. Is the states as efficient as it can be? I suspect no one will ever answer yes to that question. There are always efficiencies, as Peter has just referenced, but we are doing our best to look at those and to bring those on board. And we've had some useful suggestions from some people how we could possibly do that, but they really don't raise the kind of money. They kind of skirt around the edges in terms of the amount of money that we're looking to raise and that we need here. So whilst they are good, they're really not a fix to the main problem that we have.
Treasury Minister, I wonder about anything about finding costs, reducing costs?
It's a constant battle. You can never have an organisation as large as this with 5,500 employees where there aren't things that could be done more efficiently, and we are doing as much as we possibly can to hunt those down. There are other areas where we could save significant costs. We don't always agree with them politically. For example, Deputy Roffey wouldn't agree with me that we should means test states' pensions, for example.
No, neither would Deputy Fairbrother.
Well, neither would Deputy Fairbrother. So, but there are areas in which we could make savings, and one of the biggest costs that we have is benefits that we pay to people that perhaps don't need them. So I fully suspect that in the future we'll be having to address those things in due course.
I think that's right. I don't want to go into a political argument. I think it's like paying your house insurance for 30 years and the insurer turning around and say, your house is burnt down, but you're a multimillionaire, you don't need my help. But anyway, we will debate that another day. Darryl has asked, if it went on a rise on income tax instead to 20 or 24p in the pound, would that cover the shortfall? Or would we consider the English system of low rate, middle rate, etc.? Well, first of all, would it cover? I'll go to Beth Ann to ask how much money that would raise, either 22 or 24p tax rate.
Well, we estimate that one pence on income tax would raise about 11 to 12 million pounds. So 22 pence would raise 24 million, 24 would raise 48. So you're starting to get there, but you've still got a way to go if you want to raise it all from income tax.
The question, I guess, is competitiveness.
Yes.
It's competitive, but it's also fairness. I mean, you add that to the ordinary taxpayer. The people who are already struggling, they'd have to pay an extra 2, 3 or 4% on their income tax. If you say, the question was, and it's a fair point about the English higher rates, etc. We've got it in the policy letter. We've got an example of 60,000. If you started imposing it on people earning 60,000, there's only about 21% of people who are employed who would do that. They'd have to pay a rate of 32.5% on that extra sum. Now, that's completely uncompetitive, completely unsustainable. And if you add social insurance contributions and you add another 6.8% if you're employed, that takes you up to over 39%. If you're self-employed, that's 11%. You're paying effectively 42% of your income above a certain figure in tax.
But what the policy letter does do at the back is I don't think any of us are in any doubt that we need to raise extra money to deal with the effects, basically, of changing demographics and the costs of healthcare, pensions, social care. But of course, there's different ways that it could raise, and there's examples of if you wanted to do it through income-based taxes, how it could be done, and it's up to any of our colleagues, if they think that's a better way, to bring forward an amendment along that line. So far, I haven't heard of any being brought forward, but that doesn't mean that won't happen.
Peter, just before we go on from that, I think we're missing a point there. That, like I say, 24 doesn't raise it. 25%, perhaps 60 odd million or something like that. So we are starting to get up around that number. But that, of course, has no mitigations in it. So suddenly on the income distribution curve that we had there, everyone is now starting to pay 25% as the basic rate. So these mitigations wouldn't be in there. So, and of course, the cost of those mitigations is quite substantial. So for us to then put the mitigations in for the people on the left-hand side of that income distribution curve, then suddenly we're looking at 28, 29, 30% of income tax, so that we could mitigate for those lower paid. And then suddenly we are so far out of whack in terms of competitiveness with Jersey, Isle of Man, etc., that it just doesn't work.
Okay, right, we're going to move on. Basically, a continuation of the same theme, but slightly different pitch on it. Andrew is asking, why can't we increase the 20% for very high earners? Well, we've sort of been talking about that, but Mark, do you want to expand on the reason why not?
I suppose this was the first bus stop we arrived at in the committee when we were discussing tax, because obviously that's the first place you go to. Let's find the magic money tree. Unfortunately, the earnings distribution that we have in Guernsey is not the same as somewhere like the UK, for example, or New York. So we actually don't have a very large number of very high earners in the island. And one of the provisions of the tax review is that we need to maintain our competitiveness. Now, when you look at that distribution, the top 6% already pay 25% of tax. And what that means is that if you increase, and we've just been talking about rates and how high you'd have to put them up for people just earning over 60,000, and 60,000 is not an ultra high net worth individual. If you take that to the top 5% and apply it, those individuals will be paying astronomical tax rates, which would make it totally uncompetitive for us here. There would be many other places in the world that they would move to almost immediately. It would make it cheaper to live in London than would in Guernsey for a high earner. And so it's not one of our possible options, unfortunately, but we did look very hard at it. It's just not one of the options. We need to maintain our competitiveness at the same time as spreading the load.
But if we can put slide 5 back on again, possibly, although we're not putting up income tax for the higher earners, actually what the net impact is exactly that. It is going to be those with the broader shoulders who will be taking the greatest burden and raising this extra money. And I wouldn't be supporting this package if it wasn't that way. Okay, let's move on to our next one. And actually, two different people have both basically asked the same question. Both Jan and Laura have asked, the states have consistently failed to cut costs and the civil service grows even more with no accountability. So why should we believe that costs will be cut this time around? Peter, why should we believe you?
Well, I think the states have had this transformation policy, and the idea was to cut costs, and it hasn't cut costs as much. But when we look at the problems, if we hadn't spent that money, the costs would have gone up, because our state's infrastructure, if I can call it that, was so underfunded, outdated and unsatisfactory that it had to have money spent, a significant amount of money, just to prevent costs increasing. So, otherwise it would have cost more. But the question by Jan and Laura is a fair one. Now, the actual numbers that have increased in relation to civil servants, and I'm using that in the widest sense over the years, are in health. They've increased, the other civil servants, other public sector employees, have actually either not increased or gone back in a small number. Now, that's not in itself the whole answer. We should always be, and one of the other questions before, I think it was Dave started it, but we've all on the same theme. We should always be looking at cutting costs. We factor that into the policy letter anyway, where a significant sum will have to be cut every year. We've got to do that. We've got to be accountable. We've got to be efficient. And the States hasn't always done it in the past. It is, I can say for the last 2.5 years at least, it's been genuinely trying to do that. We haven't been as successful as we wanted to be, but we're trying our best and we will continue to try.
But to the extent that the growth in the public service as opposed to civil service has been driven by healthcare, the honest answer is I can't see that that pressure is going to go away, which is one of the reasons that we're putting this forward. Okay, well, we'll move on to Charlie, who says, will GST be charged on real property transactions, and will this apply to first-time buyers and affordable housing purchases, causing further house price rises? Mark.
That's a good question in terms of the transactions themselves. So the services that you're provided with as part of doing it, yes, I suspect they will be subject to GST, but not to the actual transactional costs themselves, which are already taxed. It's often the case that people refer to the lawyer's fees when they buy and sell property, but actually the majority of what you pay to the lawyer is actually paid on to the states in terms of document duty when it's transferred. If we wouldn't be seeking to take any action that led to higher housing prices, because we're already in a really difficult situation locally in terms of supply and demand and costs, and we fully appreciate that is causing a huge problem for many people, particularly the young. So I don't expect that it will have that much of an impact on this particular part of the market.
Madam Treasurer, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have a technical answer to this question?
I would just stress that basically all property-related matters are outside of the GST, so there'd be no GST on rent, there'd be no GST on mortgage payments, then no GST on any property transactions.
Okay, I knew the first two bits, I wasn't quite sure about the third, so that's...
But it depends on, there may be other services associated. You might get surveys and those sorts of things that would be subject to it. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on to Kylie, who says, I'm new to Guernsey. Welcome, Kylie. From the UK and pay lots of tax here, probably less than where you came from, but will this new GST be a part of the tax taken from my wages here? Dave?
Well, that's a nice, easy one. Thanks, Peter. No, this is a consumption tax, so this is not in any way based around anybody's income. So very easy, no.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is absolutely not going to affect your take-home pay. It might affect how far it goes when you go into a shop to buy something, but that's the answer, Kylie. Okay. We're going to move on to Jed, who says, "Will you have a debate with deputies opposed to GST live on social media so both parties can be properly scrutinised?" Well, I think that one has to go to Peter, actually.
Well, I offered with Deputy McKenna, who made that wonderful video about no GST, no GST. I don't think it said anything else than no GST. It almost reminded me of a song. To have a debate with him, to have an open debate with him. Deputy McKenna, for reasons only known to him really, decided not to do so. But to answer Jed's question, I'm quite prepared to have a debate with any deputy, singular or plural, who's opposed to GST, an open debate, person to person, so that, to use Jed's phrase, both parties can be properly scrutinised.
I think you're going to, it's not on social media and it's not with other parties, but I seem to recall that maybe yourself and Carl Melville might
I think on
doing
podcast, is it whatever one of those things are?
Yeah.
I've got one or two of those, but because I'm like you, we're technical, really, we're at the forefront of those, aren't we, Peter?
Absolutely, cutting edge.
But
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to do that with Deputy BFL.
Okay, but I think from this side, I think we're quite willing, but of course there will be a debate in the States, and I mean, we're not trying to say that we're the font of all wisdom. Other people will have ideas, and they'll put things forward on the floor of the House, and that's how a democracy works, and we're looking forward to it, I think. Even open to persuasion. If somebody can come, I mean, I can't see what it is, but if somebody comes up with a silver bullet that avoids the need for GST, I, for one, will be sleeping far easier, but we'll see. David, is it fair on people to have GST on food where many companies are taxed at 0%? This tax is being introduced to protect the finance industry. Mark, there's several elements to that. I think we dealt with the food bit a bit earlier, but is this all about protecting the finance industry?
No, it's not. I mean, I'd say just for the first part, no tax is fair. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have to pay very much at all, and government could run without us having to contribute any more. But we're not in that situation. GST. One of the things that's missed about GST is the finance industry will have to register for GST, and will have to either administer it itself or pay it. Now, in Jersey, they collect 12 to 13 million pounds from the finance industry, in addition to all of the other taxes they pay under 010. The 010 doesn't exist now in the way that it did when it was first implemented. There are no administration companies across the finance sector that do not contribute to the tax budget. They all pay. It tends to be companies that they administer beneath them that don't pay, things like investment funds and so on, and they're tax transparent. They pay no tax here. The people that invest in them pay tax in the jurisdictions where they live. So there is always an element of competitiveness. So when we talk about competitiveness, we mean that we mustn't kill the golden goose, effectively. And so there is always some balance in the proposals that we must bring forward. The downside to getting that wrong is potentially catastrophic, because at least 40% of the local economy is fulfilled by the finance sector, and if we were to squeeze it too hard and it left, then we would be looking at some, a really, really difficult situation, in a real pickle, as Deputy Roffey would say. So definitely not to protect finance. Finance will contribute as well under these proposals.
Okay, I mean, not protecting as in cosseting, but at the same time, there's actually nothing bad about protecting your main industry to a degree, because you don't want to scare it off. I think if you can I can sort of paraphrase what you're saying.
Yeah, I should just add as well that part of this review includes developing further tax proposals for corporate taxation to be brought back to the States by November this year. So we have to go and we have to consult with people to make sure we're doing the right thing rather than impose a tax system which would be harmful or anti-competitive. And also going on in the background, there are moves internationally to impose a minimum 15% rate for very large companies which operate in multiple jurisdictions, and Guernsey's already said it will sign up to do that, and we've estimated that's another £10 million of tax we could potentially protect there as well. So we have turned all the stones on this. We're not just looking to the public to fill the gap. The corporates will have to do their bit as well.
Okay, we're going to move on. Paul makes the point that the tax office, according to him, is currently 3 years behind on collecting income tax. Sure, they've got mine for more recently than that, but if we're to pay GST, how would this be collected efficiently? Dave, do you want to have a first go at this?
Yeah, I have no idea whether the 3 years is correct. I'm not sure anyone on the bench has that knowledge or not. But certainly the GST, as we mentioned right at the start, I think that there will be a dedicated team put in place for GST. So this won't fall within the current staff we have, as it did as Jersey have done. They put in a separate team. So I guess that answers the second part. I really can't speak to the first part about whether that is correct.
I can speak to the first part. So, Paul, 70% of our income tax is collected by ETI, so it's automatic. It doesn't require any people to be in between it and the person paying it. So we're not 3 years behind in collecting it, but we are behind somewhat in some of the more complex tax returns, and that's because they have to be done manually at the moment. We're still, we've got a foot between two stools in terms of the IT system. Once it's up and running correctly, then we should be able to catch up much more quickly.
We've still got work to do on that. Mark's absolutely right. We've still got work to do on that. But I mean, Mark has correctly said about PAYE or ETI, whatever we call it in Guernsey. But I mean, for example, Mark and I, and not Dave as well, we've been self-employed for many years, and we have to pay assessments which have got to be accurate, otherwise we could be penalised every half year, and that'll soon be every quarter, in connection with our tax. So by the 31st of December, 30th of June, you've got to pay X pounds towards your tax if you're self-employed. It could be better, but it's nowhere near as bad as people think it is.
Okay, we're going to move on, and Michael's raising a question. I'm glad that it's come up because I think there's been some misunderstanding over it. Michael asks, how would GST be applied to all online purchases? Well, I'll ask, again, the technical bit first to Bethan, and then we'll maybe add some political colour to it afterwards.
Okay. So the intention is that any company with turnover of over £300,000 would need to register for GST. So that applies to local companies and companies supplying goods and services into Guernsey as well. So that's our intention. So if you buy from one of those companies that sells lots of stuff into Guernsey,
You can name them. Go on. It's not we're not the BBC. So
potentially Amazon.
Yeah.
Then the intention is that they would take GST at source. At the moment, they would take the VAT off for you. In the future, they will put the GST on. So that will be dealt with in that way. For any smaller retailers, the intention is that the GST will be collected at the border, which is why we've got additional border agency staff in the proposals, with a small de minimis of about 130,000, I think. Sorry, 130 pounds de minimis. So you wouldn't pay GST on anything below that, but anything above that you would collect it.
That's on those small ones at the border.
Only the small ones at the border.
Basically, no de minimis on
for anything from Amazon or any other large retailers, you would pay on everything.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think that's answered the question, but just to add some colour, I mean, there has been quite a lot of concern, I think, from local retailers that this would be a competitive disadvantage, but you can assure them, can you, Mark, that
yes,
that's
absolutely.
not...
I mean, it's been one of the benefits of having this system already implemented in Jersey that we've been able to talk to them about who they've spoken to, how they've approached it, what kind of arrangements they've made. And so they've been focusing particularly on that one, but some other suppliers as well that are very popular in Jersey, like John Lewis, for example. And they're going to be collecting tax directly from those. So, and that actually cuts down significantly on the administration because it's all done for you automatically, effectively.
Okay, we'll move on to Vicky, who says, so are there going to be more people on income support? I suppose technically at the margins, I'm going for this one because this is really a social security question. Because income support will be put up by 5%, the requirement rates to cover the cost of the GST on food and on clothes and on everything else. That might mean that there will be at the margin slightly more people who qualify for income support. There will largely be people who are already working, and I want to stress that income support, there's this vision that you have people who work and there are people on income support. It's not like that. If people are on a modest income, particularly if they've got children's support, high outgoings, they qualify for a top-up, and there might be a few more that will qualify in that respect. I think that's my understanding of the situation, but if anybody's got anything to add, that's fine. No, okay, then we'll crack on. And 26 is Gary. What happens if people start to boycott restaurants, hotels and luxury items? The town experience is already very disappointing. Could we see more places close? Well, Peter, do you want to first crack on that?
Of course, I've got interests in restaurants, etc. Not so much luxury items. I don't think my Skoda qualifies for that. But being serious, people are going to have... We're in an era now where people are going to be watching their money. And I don't mean this in any flippant way at all, because life is difficult. Guernsey's an expensive place to live. I think within a short period of time, people will have got used to GST, just as they've got used to the equivalent in other jurisdictions. And I think that it will be just part of normal living experience. I know it's easy for me to say that, but I really think that is the case. But yes, I think people will be watching their money. They've got to watch it anyway with all the increased cost of living as it is.
I think, Gary, there is no such thing as a good increase in taxes, so I can't disagree with you, but I think we do have to bear in mind the other side of the equation, and what happens if the state doesn't raise more revenue, which is not enough money to spend on the burgeoning healthcare requirements and pensions, etc. So it is, in politics you have to balance those things. Anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, just one thing again. It's another one where we can draw on the experience of Jersey. So these things were spoken about in Jersey pre-GST. And of course, GST was introduced and people didn't boycott restaurants. There are still the restaurants there. Retail is still as it was. So it's very easy to be doom and gloom about it. And undoubtedly, as Peter said, it will have an effect on people. And as you said, Peter, there's no such thing as a good tax. But we shouldn't look at this as the end of the world. Jersey went through this experience and came out the other side.
Okay, we'll move on from Gary to Dave, who says, what are we doing to reduce the dependency on the finance industry? That's rather broader than this tax thing, but it's still a fair question. It's still, who wants to take this? Do you want to take this, Peter?
Yeah, I think we're so dependent on the finance industry. It gives an overwhelming percentage of our GDP. It makes us a more affluent community. We've been looking for years to try and reduce the dependency or have other industries. They generally emerge themselves. For example, we all know Specsavers is probably the leading line, and there are others that we could mention. We've got a very able group in economic development, the civil servants and politicians, and they're looking at whatever they can, and I think constructively, in reducing the dependency on the finance industry. That said, the finance industry will provide our bread and butter, and perhaps a bit more than our bread and butter in years to come.
Mark, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I've been reasonably heavily involved in trying to encourage some of the new industries, nascent industries, particularly in pharmaceuticals, cannabis, psilocybin, other opportunities that are coming into the market. And obviously we've still, even 20, 30 years later, we've got a lot of derelict glass still around the island that we could be using for more positive things, and also providing a type of work. Not everybody growing up in Guernsey wants to go and work in an office. A lot of people, would appreciate going to work in greenhouses, particularly these days, because that industry is much more scientific and modern than it used to be when I used to go and help my granddad pick the tomatoes. So there's, there is a lot we should do. The other thing I would say about the finance industry isn't a blob of one thing. It does lots and lots and lots of different things. It's actually a big sort of web of all sorts of different types of business. I work in reinsurance and insurance, for example. We help in Guernsey people to insure risk against hurricanes. There's a lot of really high quality work, niche work that's done in Guernsey, which is really good for the people that work here. And I think it will continue into the future. The old days of the kind of, stack it high and sell it cheap have gone, and Guernsey's turning into a much more mature jurisdiction as part of that. But I agree, if we had some more strings to our bow, it would be really helpful.
I think Mark was slightly prescient looking at the next question from Christopher, who says that GST will cripple small businesses and the average working man, so maybe you should look at legalising cannabis and taxing it like cigarettes. Well, I don't want to get into a cannabis debate here because there's lots of different shades of opinion on that, but go on, I'll give Deputy Mahoney here first go on that one.
Yeah, again, sorry to reference Jersey again, but these were the arguments that have been put forward in Jersey pre-GST, that it will cripple small businesses and the average man in the street will be badly hit about it. And it didn't happen. Yes, it did affect them, especially as Deputy Ferber said, first year, I think it's forecast at 3.4% as inflation will hit people. So that's not good, but is a one-year pain. So history and experience doesn't bear out the statement there that it will cripple small businesses. Yes, they will be affected, but cripple is a very strong word to use. And as for the second part of that about legalising cannabis, well, there's a 5-hour debate on its own, so we don't have time to go into that.
No.
You were trying to come in?
Yeah, so just to say that, we aren't implementing this in the same way as it's been done in Jersey either. This is a package, and we've shown now, I think, on several occasions that those at the bottom end will be better off. So 60% of local households will be better off under these proposals. So crippling the lower paid is definitely, and we set out with the objective of making sure that doesn't happen. And it's been very helpful to have Deputy Roffey on the committee to keep us on the straight and narrow in that regard.
And I would just add, without getting into the debate on cannabis, as somebody who has a certain amount of sympathy for legalisation and quality control and taxation, it's not going to touch the sides on the tens of millions of pounds that we're actually going to need to raise. It's simply it might help, but that would all it would be. Okay, let's move on to Frank. Should there be a minimum tax charge for cash/asset-rich individuals who are not liable for tax based on their income? Well, I think the part of this package will tax them more, but the concept, I don't think we've looked at a minimum tax charge. We don't even know what everybody's assets are. But Peter, what's your reaction to that idea?
I think that's the point. It's the practicality of it. Would we be what we don't want to be seen to do is to have the equivalent of a wealth tax, because that would make us uncompetitive. That wouldn't be a good thing for our islands. But there are people who live on capital who've got a lot of capital but haven't got liquid assets in the sense. So they will, under this new system, they will have to pay, and they'll have to pay something where they're paying very little at the moment.
So they'll pay on purchases, but also for people who've got income but it's unearned income. At the moment under Social Security, if they go out and get a part-time job and earn $15,000 a year, that's all they pay on. They may have 80, 100,000, 200,000 coming in unearned income and they don't pay a bean on it. So it is trying to make it fairer and make sure that people can't avoid contributing to the society that they live in and where they use the services. Okay, unless somebody's burning to come in, we'll move on to our 30th question of the evening, which is from Jackie, which is, what is the cost to local businesses who you plan to turn into tax collectors? So the burden on businesses who will collect. So Mark.
So there's a provision in the policy letter for £1 million, I think, towards assisting businesses convert in circumstances where they're not already set up to do so. And clearly, most of our local trading businesses are already paying GST in Jersey anyway, so they're completely set up to do it and ready to do so. I think one of the fallacies about this, and might be something we could helpfully put on our future.gg site, is the extent of how complex this is to collect. It's really very simple. The form that you have to fill in literally records what you've sold and the GST on it, and what you've bought from somebody else and had to pay for, and the tax that you pay is the difference between the two. So it's not very complicated. It's less than a side of A4, and very much the case that if there are people that are finding that difficult, then we have provided for there to be some assistance to do that. And the other thing I just reiterate again is that small local businesses that turn over less than £300,000 a year don't have to register, don't have to collect GST at all.
Okay, right, we'll press on. Wayne is next. Have you considered some alternatives, such as taxing empty buildings Well, tax cannabis, we've dealt with that just a moment ago, or decided not to, or remove the tax cap on higher bands for those over 80 grand. So, sorry to come back to you, Mark, but you're the Treasury lead, so empty buildings and removing the tax cap.
Actually, we have already done that. So there was a proposal in the budget in November for putting taxation on empty buildings and derelict buildings, in fact. And, you know, where if people might have a second property in Guernsey or whatever and be moving backwards and forwards, they will have to pay significantly higher. And I think we plan for a 5 times increase in their TRP. So it's a significant hike. Hopefully that will go some way. I mean, we aren't going to know how much that might collect until we've done all the work on it, but that as a proposal has been accepted and it is being worked up. We've talked about cannabis. In terms of tax caps, a lot of people don't realise that if you earn over £90,000 in Guernsey, your allowances, that's to say the amount that you can earn before you start to be taxed, disappear. So people that are on higher earnings already get no allowances, and that's part of the way in which Guernsey's tax system is progressive. In terms of, we talked about higher rates of tax for higher earners before. There just aren't enough of them. And the other thing, again, you know, we do have high caps. Higher rate caps, but that's the amount of tax paid. That's not the salary that those people earn. So you have to be earning over £1 million a year in order to get to the top of the caps anyway. And that puts us on a level playing field with Jersey, which is part of the trying to make sure that we maintain our competitiveness.
Okay, well, we've come to our scheduled finish time, so what I'm going to do, I think, with the agreement of the panel is say, please don't send in any more questions, but we've got a few that we know are already in the system, so we'll rattle through those so that people haven't made the effort and then not had an answer. So we'll go to the next question, which is from Phil, which is very simple. Where do you think the general public will find all this extra money? How are they going to pay this tax, Peter?
Of course, it's difficult. It is difficult. That's why it's a phased system. It's an interlocutory system. We're not looking to get all the 100 million that we need from the taxpayer. We're looking to make savings and grow the economy. But we do need this extra tax because we can't reduce services beyond a certain level. They're going to increase anyway, as you've detailed, Peter. So it'll be difficult, but I'm sorry, there is no alternative other than to either radically cut services, which of course people agree with until it affects them, or put up taxes.
But by and large, where the extra money is going to come from is the better off, isn't it, Mark?
Yes, that's absolutely right. As we've seen with the graph on slide 5, the better off will be contributing more. The other thing I say, it's not just the general public paying. Again, corporates will be paying. The finance sector will have to contribute by registering and contributing. And as I said, that in Jersey, 12 to 13 million is raised by GST from the finance sector itself. So it's not just the general public paying. And I think the other important point to make is without a GST, the only other real heavy lifting tax that we could look at is more income tax. And of course, that's a much smaller group than the general public generally, and it's a group, unfortunately, because of our demographics, which is shrinking. And as that shrinks, then the pressure on that group will go up and up and up. As we heard earlier, 5%, 6% of income tax doesn't cut it. You'd have to pay 8%, 9%. As that population reduces in time, hopefully we can keep it stable, and the States has agreed to do that. But if we can't do that, there'll be even more pressure on a smaller group of the general public. And those people that are earning and working are the people that spend money in the shops and the garages and elsewhere in the first place.
Okay, I think we've got another 3 questions in the system, so we will try and rattle through those. Carl, Guernsey is already more expensive than the UK or Jersey. Food and clothing are the same, if not more. So how does GST make us competitive? Yeah, Peter, do you accept the premise first?
Well, certainly we are more expensive than lots of places in the UK, and I'm not sure we're necessarily more expensive than Jersey, but we're certainly in lots of places in the UK. I'm not going to get into an argument about whether they are or not. The idea of GST is to make us, is to get tax from those that can afford it most, is to provide benefits for those who can afford it least, and the idea is to spread the burden more fairly. Otherwise, you just lump more, as you say, on the heavy lifting tax, or there's been said, heavy lifting tax of income tax, which just makes us uncompetitive and I think is unfair on the ordinary taxpayer.
One of the interesting things, in the middle of that question, it says food and clothing are the same, if not more.
Yeah.
Clothing is an interesting one because I get the impression sometimes you walk into a multinational clothing shop and there's an embedded barcode almost, and you're paying exactly the same in Guernsey as you would be in Jersey or the UK. So
that's true.
they're just making more profit on us because we don't have a consumption tax, effectively. Okay, well, sorry, yes, of course, yeah.
The experience, it's worth saying that the experience in Jersey is that because of that, obviously that's why prices didn't increase as much as they'd anticipated, because a lot of those, high street brands that are selling in the UK and in Guernsey and Jersey, their prices stayed the same. So the GST didn't add to the cost there.
Well, it will add to some kind. I think food probably certainly would. But Annette, will charity shops be expected to add GST to their goods? Mark? Yes, Mark.
Good question. I have to register a conflict there because as a director of Citizens Advice, and we've just moved our shop from down on the bridge up to Monterrey. Technical question. My understanding is that charities are exempt.
I'm not sure. Charities are exempt, but not when they're trading.
Trading.
So how would this work, Beth Ann?
So if it's a charity shop selling donated goods, so that we class that as a charitable activity, that would be zero rated, or so there would be no GST on charitable activities. But if a charity is trading and competing with other similar businesses, and I don't want to give a Guernsey example, so I'll give a Jersey example, like Jersey Zoo. They have a cafe restaurant in there. So that would be treated as a business and would be charged GST.
So the technical answer to the question of the charity shops, which the typical charity shop is using donated goods, then the answer to Annette is no, that they won't be. Okay.
Bric-a-brac, that sort of thing, that's not a problem. But if you're providing window cleaning services or something, then you'd have to pay.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to move to we've rattled through. This will be our 35th question of the evening, which is far more than I really expected we'd be able to get through. And it's from Katie. Katie says, is there a minimum threshold for businesses before GST is payable? I'm presuming that means minimum turnover rather than minimum for an item, and there is. So, Dave, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, 300,000. If your turnover is less than 300,000, then you don't have to register. The experience from our sister island actually is that lots of businesses under 300,000 did choose to register for GST, but that is purely down to the business owner, so there is no requirement to do so whatsoever.
Okay, well, we've run 6 or 7 minutes over schedule, but I'm delighted we had so many questions. So thank you, everybody that put in questions this evening, and thank you, everybody who was watching that didn't, but wanted to hear what the answers were. Just before closing, I want to remind you that there are some more information events, public events coming up. So if you do have more questions or you want to speak to members of the panel or to P&R members, then where you should go is, first of all, there'll be a drop-in held at Beausejour. That's on this coming Saturday morning, the 14th. That will be between 10 a.m. and noon. And people can come at any time within that envelope to speak individually to one of the states members involved. Then there's going to be a public meeting to be held at the Beausejour Theatre. That will be on the evening of Tuesday the 17th. That will start at 7 o'clock. And again, anybody that attends will have an opportunity to ask questions. And that will also be live streamed on Facebook. So it's like this, but it will not be mainly for people asking questions on Facebook. You'll just be able to watch it. It's a live event. And then we are, of course, going to go to Alderney because we're in fiscal union with Alderney, so we must do that. And we'll be there on the morning of Saturday the 21st for a drop-in at the Butte Centre. And again, like the Guernsey one, that's between 10 a.m. and noon. So once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panel here. Thank you to everybody that asked questions. And good night to everybody.